Jonathan Taves is in line to return to the NHL, and the Winnipeg Jets are going to be first in that line. But this really seems like a signing that's not going to help the Jets at all.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, there is news that the Jonathan Taves return to the NHL is likely imminent, and the Winnipeg Jets are going to be involved in that race. In fact, they will probably be first in line to sign him. He's got connections to the Jets. He's a local hometown hero, and Winnipeg already has a major need for a center. My concern is that Winnipeg sees him as their answer, perhaps to a middle six or even second line center, and Jonathan Taves hasn't been on the ice in an NHL game in over 2 years. So we're going to chat about the implications of that, as well as maybe some other trade partners where the Jets might actually be able to find a real center that's capable of playing in 2025 and 2026, as well as the apparent new Stanley Cup Final, which is a rehash of last year. How exciting! But before we dive into all of that, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, the Jets are apparently hot to trot for Jonathan Taves. This isn't a secret. Shoveldayoff has constantly tipped his hand about Taves' return and has really spoken quite glowingly of Jonathan over the past couple of seasons. And it sounds like they've maintained a fair bit of contact with each other's camps. In my mind, Darren Dreger talking about him potentially sliding in as Winnipeg's 2C is sort of the bellwether for what Winnipeg thinks he can do. And if this really is the Jets' plan, it's crazy to me. Taves hasn't played since 2023. He just came off of a weird sort of unconventional rehab process from a really big bout with long COVID. And long COVID, I don't know how much y'all know about it or if you've seen the impacts, but it can really mess with your energy levels, your respiratory system, all sorts of stuff. It is an absolute bear to kick, and the recovery process is very arduous. Some people don't actually recover from it and haven't been able to even now. So it's devastating. It is extremely difficult to work through. And Taves is going to come back having not taken the ice in several years as a 37-year-old center. Maybe he can still do something, but when he was in his final years with the Blackhawks, he was still getting some points here and there, like 25 to 30 points, sometimes as high as 35 or 40, probably playing a much more elevated role than you'd want. But I think everyone could pretty much see that he was slowing down. The Hawks were declining. He was getting significantly older. And for me, I just don't really understand what the benefit is here. The Jets, look, they don't exactly have a ton of centers to work with. And if Lowry really is not going to be 100% when he comes back at the start of, the season or whenever he does return, the need for a 2C, I said yesterday, becomes really imperative. And not just a second line center, but somebody who can also back up Lowry. Adam's getting hip surgery. And if it is a very serious hip surgery, which a lot of them are, rehab can be a very long process. Some folks don't even, get the full usage of their lower body the way they had it before that surgery. So, this could be really impactful. And unlike a lot of other teams, Lowry's, specific role as Winnipeg's elite third line center, which we know he's not really the 3C, he's more like a shadow 2C, means that he eats a lot of matchups, and his impact on the team really domino effects down the rest of the lineup. So if he's not 100%, that is a huge loss. Taves has never played Lowry's game. He's not a Lowry replacement. He has traditionally been a skilled power forward with good two-way offensive acumen, and earlier in his career, some really strong defensive impacts. But again, in the waning years of his time in Chicago, he did not look like the same player. He was slowing down. His overall ability to create offense really declined. And so a lot of it was probably more a byproduct at that point of, getting some good power play time and just playing lots of minutes, right? He was going to still play a fair bit for the Hawks. Again, he might have been declining. He might have been on the wrong side of 30, but he was still one of Chicago's biggest star names. And now that he's had a couple of years off, we don't really know what shape he's in. He's 100% committed, he said, to coming back to the NHL. It sounds like he wants to make that return this season, which it's been rumored for a long time. And I can tell you, the Jets are going to be the one to do it. I'd be really shocked if he doesn't end up in Winnipeg. I have some personal reservations about all of this, but I think the biggest thing is, I just don't really understand why Winnipeg would try and use a roster spot here. Taves, even as a bit of a stopgap or something, just doesn't really feel like a useful investment, right? You're looking at players like David Gustafsson, Brad Lambert, Dmitry Reshevsky, maybe Nikita Chibrikov. You have to keep some roster spots open for your kids. And only a couple of those might be centers. But, if you're not really willing to give a guy like Gustafsson a shot in this role, I don't really understand how Taves is going to be much better. In fact, there's a good chance that he's really not going to be anywhere near the level of player that he was even at the end of, his tenure in the NHL before he had that hiatus. So I just don't really get this. Winnipeg, surely if they don't sign him for whatever reason, some other team will. Maybe they get a Corey Perry-like return. Maybe he finds a way to be a productive NHLer. I guess in fourth line minutes, it's fine, but I just don't really think that there's a lot of value to this. Winnipeg needs to get faster, younger, more skilled, and with more offensive potential. Taves probably would help in some ways. He's probably got some more offensive skill than, Nemesnikov maybe, but if you're asking him to try and be a guy who plays much further up your lineup, I just don't get it. I don't think he's really at that stage of his career where he can drive those sorts of results. He's on the wrong side. He's almost 40. He's not just on the wrong side of 30. He's almost 40 years old. And at this stage, there's just not a lot that he's probably going to bring to this team that somebody else in free agency or on the trade market couldn't bring, right? And I just don't really feel like this is the move. If you're going to bring in somebody for your bottom six and you need a stopgap for Lowry, maybe make it a more permanent addition. The Sabres are about to clean house. It sounds like a quarter of their team is potentially pissed off with their front office and with the direction of the team. Ryan McLeod could be an easy solution to your problem, and he gives you some real legitimate upside. If, Buffalo wants to blow things up and change things again, he's a guy that makes a ton of sense to target. Players like that who really do fit Winnipeg's timeline, who can stick around for a couple of seasons, and who also haven't been off the ice for 2 years, feels like a much more standard gamble. And look, I get it, right? It's only going to cost you cap space in the roster spot to bring Taves in. There's going to be some ticket sale draws because he's a local hometown hero. I get all that. And don't get me wrong, it makes a lot of sense from that perspective. But if the Jets are actually serious about winning a cup and actually interested in going deeper, they just don't have the luxury of gifting roster spots to guys who, frankly, haven't played in years. And I feel like there's been a really warm reaction to all of this because of Taves's, hometown hero connections, rather than looking at the reality of a guy who's been off the ice for several years, coming off of a very serious medical condition, and you want him to somehow, bear the burden of whatever Lowry can't. Yeah, that just feels like you're asking for a lot of trouble. So I want to explore a little bit more about players and some teams that I actually think would make a lot of sense for the Jets to go trade with and talk to. But before we do, did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action than right now. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Obviously, this is a critical moment not only for the NBA but the NHL as well. And if you're looking at some player props and bets, obviously Connor McDavid versus Alexander Barkov is going to be one of the biggest storylines of this upcoming Stanley Cup Finals. This is a great chance for you to get in big, right? Maybe you figure out how much their plus or minus might look after the series. Maybe you know what their individual points contributions are going to be. This is the time to take advantage of your knowledge and win big. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets to win even more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting a little bit about some potential trade partners for the Jets. Obviously, Winnipeg is looking for a 2C now, and Jonathan Taves is one of their choices. I said it doesn't really make a lot of sense. At best, you're probably getting a 4C. Winnipeg really needs to swing bigger. It can't just go in these value margins where there's really very limited upside. Winnipeg has to go for something truly special and swing for the fences. The Jets are in a real competitive window. If they don't take advantage of Hellebuck in his prime and what this team is continuing to offer, even with the limited offensive talent that they may have, it's a real missed opportunity. And so one of the teams that the Jets tried to work with earlier at the trade deadline didn't really get anywhere. It's the Seattle Kraken. But the Kraken have made some very big changes. They've got a new GM. They've got a new coaching staff. And so, Lane Lambert's going to be taking over there. And this is a really intriguing time for Seattle because they've got a fair number of contracts on the books, but they kind of need to make some real adjustments to the age of their group. You look at a lot of the biggest deals, and a lot of those players are either right around 30 or past 30. And so for the Kraken, they kind of feel like they need to overhaul and really get younger, which is great for the Jets, right? Winnipeg's got a lot of youth assets, a lot of mid-tier and even halfway decent picks in the later rounds. They can assemble a pretty decent package that's going to be competitive with what's out there on the market for players like Jared McCann. McCann has been one of those targets that I think Winnipeg was very covetous of, and now that there might be a real chance that if he waves, you can get him to Winnipeg, this is a time to maybe redouble those efforts. Maybe Lane Lambert wants to help coach one of his family members in Brad Lambert. Maybe there's a real fit there as, the Kraken kind of need to give Beniers and Wright and Tovanen some real support. This is a chance to maybe make some swaps and get younger, get faster. And for the Jets, McCann is a really elite top sixer who would immediately improve not only our forward depth, but would also improve our finishing and playmaking talent. Obviously, he's primarily played out as a winger recently, but he can play center. And I think that that's a really important piece. If you were to get him between, say, Perfetti and whoever else that second line winger is going to be, there could be some really intriguing stuff. I just hope that they don't do the whole thing of like McCann, Nemesnikov, and Perfetti, or McCann, Taves, and Perfetti. I feel like that's not really the sort of mixture I'm looking for. So they could be really intriguing. It would be a hefty package. The Jets are going to have to give up something pretty significant. But like I said at the trade deadline, when I was really hot to trot for McCann, he is absolutely worth it. He is really, close to that first line territory, maybe just a shade under in his production. Still a fantastic player, signed for extremely cheap at just $5 million for 2 seasons more. I really don't see how this is a lose-lose if you manage to bring him in. This is a win for the Jets. I think it'd probably be a win for Seattle too, because they frankly need to start restructuring their roster. And I think the Jets have some real good futures that they can toss their way. If we're looking at Vancouver, Vancouver's kind of a funky one. The Canucks have some interesting players for your middle six rotation. I like Connor Garland a lot. He was one of our trade targets earlier. And Garland, especially if Ehlers leaves, Garland doesn't really replace Nick's impact, but he has a good style of play, some real nice forechecking, and he's very skilled around the goal line and those face-off circles in a way that I think would make a lot of sense for the Jets. The only trick with him is that he is an expiring free agent, so you've only got him for this upcoming season, and then you'd have to figure out if you want to bring him back. But I like him as a sort of middle six versatile winger who's very pesky, who's got a lot of fire in his veins. He kind of has that Tanev chippiness, but he also brings a level of skill and finishing talent that maybe a lot of guys in our bottom six have kind of been missing. And you can slide him up and down your lineup. He brings enough skill to play on multiple lines and trios. And so I would be really interested in a Garland package. I don't know that he would cost a ton, and his cap hit is super reasonable. So no reason not to go knocking if that's a door the Jets are interested in. Niels Hoglander, also a guy that I would have some level of interest in. Hoglander has always kind of been on the fringes with this Canucks team. He signed for a couple more seasons at about $3 million, and I feel like it's just a matter of time before some team brings him in and he really starts to hit it off. I kind of feel like he's a Sharksy sort of player. I could be wrong about that. He just really strikes me as an intriguing roster player whose scoring rates and whose fancy stats under the surface are really intriguing and maybe primed for some sort of a breakout if he can ever figure out a team that's going to have the right coaching staff to take advantage of what he brings. So if the Jets kind of went with like a buy low candidate to upgrade their wing depth, especially for the middle six, Hoglander's a little on the smaller side, but he's fast, he's skilled, and he loves to shoot. So he's a guy I could very much see, in a Jets uniform, maybe even becoming kind of a very light Ehlers. Not the full package, let me tell you, but somebody who can bring that craftiness and creativeness down low. You probably are wondering if I'm going to talk about Pettersson. Obviously, Elias is one of my most coveted center players out there and a guy who's probably going to be available on the market. I don't know what his price is going to be because there's some injury concern, and he's got a lot of term at a lot of cash with a couple of seasons where he has really not been anywhere near his best. And so it's an interesting situation. I might focus a little more on Pettersson as we start to get closer to any sort of trade rumors. He's not really being shopped actively as far as the public is aware right now, and so I'm not going to look too much into it at the moment. But if that starts to change, we will chat a little deeper about it. Now, the last port of call that could be of interest is the Calgary Flames. I have no idea what Calgary's plan is at this point. The Flames are in a really curious spot where they've got a lot of really good future young prospects, but they do kind of need some help in the immediate term. They've got a fair bit of money locked up in a number of players in their forward grouping, but after that, things start to clear out really quickly, especially on their blue line. If the Jets were interested in maybe going for, say, a Nazem Kadri or maybe a Blake Coleman, you've got some veteran centers who, yeah, they're kind of on the wrong side of 30, but they're still pretty productive. Kadri's really good even now at 35. He's very pesky. He's got a bit of a mean streak that could be a little bit of a tricky situation if he starts taking lots of penalties, but his skill and two-way acumen and offensive creativity, undeniable. He signed at a very reasonable cap hit, and he's extended for 4 more years. So it's not like the term is super eye-watering. But by the time his contract does finish, he's going to be almost 40. So something to keep in mind. But if he's already playing this well at age 35, maybe he's going to have one of those really graceful aging curves. Coleman, I would feel a little bit cooler on. I think his elite finishing seasons and stuff where he was this really underrated Pajot type, maybe starting to fade a little bit. The speed and the skating stride have started to slow a little bit. But, at a little under $5 million, if you're looking for a guy who could be a really versatile middle six center and can maybe help share some of that offensive burden and certainly bring more offense than maybe Vlad can or Lowry can, that could be an intriguing look. I don't know that he'd cost that much. And, Coleman, he's a real solid player. He's got a very passionate disposition. I think he could be an intriguing target. I've thought about him before. And the Flames, honestly would probably, be interested in a lot of what the Jets have in their own prospect pool. Maybe they look at a Walton or a Barlow or something. Some of these guys I'd be less inclined to trade, for Winnipeg's future core. Walton, I think, is getting to be closer to a really hard to move kind of prospect, but not unmovable, but certainly a guy that I'd want to hang on to. But if you're looking at a Barlow or something in that tier and some sort of a pick package, maybe you can free up one of these centers who might truly be able to help the Jets in the very near term, and maybe even in the season or two beyond that. A lot of intrigue there. I know the Flames are probably looking to do some real business, and if they are, and if the Jets are open to it, I would be calling them, especially if Rasmus Andersson might also be available. He is super fun. You're looking for a game-changing right-handed D on your blue line. Well, that would be a heck of a way to swing. But for now, let's stick to the forwards and hope that the Jets can find their 2C of the present and perhaps the short-term future. Now, amidst all of this, of course, the Stanley Cup Finals are now confirmed. We have Edmonton versus Florida again. I have some interesting thoughts about this series. I have some thoughts about who might emerge victorious. We'll talk about that in just a brief moment because you might be surprised at who I'm calling in this one. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about the Edmonton Oilers and the Florida Panthers squaring off in the Stanley Cup Finals. This is going to be a powerhouse matchup. It's the one that we had last year. A little disappointing that we didn't get new teams. Even just one new team would be pretty fun, but unfortunately, the Jets didn't allow that to happen. Neither did the Dallas Stars, evidently, and Carolina and company also failed to help us out on the Eastern bracket. So instead, we've got two of the really strongest Corsi 4 teams in the regular season squaring off once again. You can certainly argue that it's the fair matchup. I will 100% hear that argument. I think it's deserved in a lot of ways, even if it really annoys me. So this series is going to come down to a couple of really big things, right? I think the first big question that I have is the goaltending battle, because up front, both of these teams are fairly deep. Right now, the Oilers are getting contributions from a lot of their middle and bottom six in ways that I honestly didn't expect them to. If you told me that guys like, Corey Perry, Adam Henrique, maybe even Kasperi Kapanen, players like that were starting to really jump into the offense and get some scoring going, I would not have really believed you, but they have been. They've played a role. Maybe they haven't been that great, but they're playing a role, and they're offering some real support to guys like McDavid, Draisaitl, Bouchard. It's been a really balanced offense, and there's really not too many weak points on this Oilers team until you look at one particular part, and it's the goaltending. Stuart Skinner has been very good the past couple of weeks, and that could continue. I think my biggest, question here is you look at, Skinner versus Bobrovsky, right? Bobrovsky is a Vezina winner. He has already won a cup. He's been one of Florida's better goalies that they've brought in over the past couple of years. If you match these guys against each other, I just feel like Bobrovsky has that certain playoff sauce. He used to not have that, but he's been juiced the past couple of years. I kind of feel like the Panthers are seriously cooking with him in net. And even though, the Panthers may not have as high-end a forward group as the Oilers do, where they'll have that advantage is in net. Defensively, that's an interesting battle because I feel like, Bouchard and Nurse and Kulak and a few others, they've got a good puck-moving group, but also one that's perhaps prone to some defensive lapses in high-leverage situations. And so if that happens and it puts, Skinner under a lot of stress, it's going to be a very difficult matchup. You've got Barkov, Reinhardt, if he's anywhere near healthy. You've got, of course, Tkachuk, although Tkachuk has also looked a little slower this playoff series. So there's a lot of interesting matchups here. I kind of lean towards this being another Panthers year. I think the Oilers are really good, and I think that they have a legitimate shot to get the first Canadian Cup in ages. But something about the Panthers and the power of the Rat just feels like it's going to overcome them again. I do feel like this is going to be a 6 or a 7 game series. I'd be shocked if it ends, a lot sooner. I think a lot of people would probably disagree with my assessment. They'd probably say the Oilers are likely to go through, especially after they just spent like 4 straight games dumping on the Stars. They really ripped Dallas a new one. And because of that, you'd probably think the Panthers are in line for a similar treat. But I think Florida does actually match up pretty nicely against this Oilers team. Again, they're not going to have quite the matchup, 1-to-1 of the elite top. McDavid, Draisaitl, kind of hard to match that 1-2 punch. But Barkov, Tkachuk, Reinhart, that's a really good answer, even if Reinhart may not be 100% himself. Lundell is a really sleeper pick for the series to be a huge factor. Lundell has maybe been one of the most underrated centers out there in the whole league. I've got a lot of time for him. He's a very fun player, and I think for this Panthers team, he just gives them such a dangerous dimension in their middle and bottom 6. They have this matchup nightmare situation that I just don't know how teams really cope with it. Well, Edmonton might be one of the few that can, but again, you get down to the goaltending matchup, and suddenly, the Oilers don't quite have the advantage there. So this is a fun series. As much as I am annoyed by it being the playoff series again, it will be fun. I think it'll be a high-quality series. I think it'll probably go pretty close to the distance, if not the full 7 games, and I do think Florida comes out on the winning end. If it's a very one-sided series, that would be pretty shocking to me. I think if you're the Panthers, the only thing you do worry about is that they've taken some really tough injuries recently. They have struggled to outplay some of their opponents in a couple of these games. They've really had to lean on some fluky bounces and some poor goaltending in a couple of these outings when maybe their offense wasn't quite up to speed at the start of the game. So if the Oilers come out swinging and really take an early series lead that puts the Panthers down in a 2-0 hole, we might be having a little bit of a different conversation. But I tend to think that, Florida really doesn't have any fear winning on the road. I think that they match up pretty well against Western Conference teams too, and they're not facing a squad that's overly physical. So this one is going to be a series on counters. It's going to be about mistakes. And I am curious to see how the Oilers handle a second straight Cup Finals appearance against this Panthers team. Last year's Florida squad was arguably better. This Panthers team definitely has more vulnerabilities, but I think that they've shown in the net they are still one of the strongest teams, right? They're the good that they create tends to really outproduce the bad. And so I just feel like they've got that special playoff sauce. They're cooking, and I really feel like they're going to again, keep the Oilers from winning, their first cup in ages. And it is a little disappointing. I suppose I am kind of hoping slightly that the Panthers lose. Canada getting a cup would be great, and I think it would be awesome for the sport. The other part of me hopes that it's not the Edmonton Oilers that does it. Would much rather a team like the Jets finally break that curse. Winnipeg has to conquer its own demons to actually make it to that point, so if the Oilers win, so be it. Winnipeg just needs to then answer with their own, I guess. But curious to know your series predictions. Are you even going to watch the Cup Finals? I will say I'm perhaps not as excited about it as I might ordinarily have been if it was a different matchup. But hey, at least we get a pretty good top-tier series between 2 elite teams. But give me your series predictions in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.